I'll start introducing myself. My name is Stacey Maines. I'm a licensed social worker, geriatric care manager. I've been in the field of senior care about 23 years or so. I'll focus in terms of my introduction. I work a lot on guardianship cases at various points. I work closely with attorneys, with all the different players along the way, with families, and at every different stage of guardianship, from sort of the pre-guardianship, do we need this, is this appropriate, to the it's in court right now, to the it's just been finalized, I've just been appointed guardian, now what do I do? And we're going to get into that. Shana and I will kind of talk about all those points together today. But I think I want to start off by saying, anybody who has had a reaction to the movie of saying, oh my gosh, this is horrible, or this could never happen, anybody have that? Because I did. Yeah. I want to just provide some reassurance, and Shana and I will certainly provide some facts. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. I literally had to shut the movie off because
I was going to ask you if you had the wall. I was going to ask you if you had the picture.
No, I don't have the picture. I don't serve as a guardian. As a care manager, I sort of often work with the guardians or the court attorneys, and I'll explain my role a little bit more as we go along. But I'm hoping that, through the conversation today and education, you'll learn a little bit about what we do, and that sometimes it is a necessary component in how to understand the process and how it really works. And hopefully that movie sparked some questions and some concerns, and it'll spark some dialogue. But I just want to provide that reassurance. The social worker in me wants to make sure everybody is calm and good, and that we're not having to peel people from the ceiling. So again, my name is Stacey. I'm a care manager, and I'll let Shana introduce herself, and she'll get started with overview.
So I'm Shana Seigel, and first I want to say about Stacey is a care manager that I work with on a fairly regular basis, along with a number of other care managers throughout the state. I always tell clients that care managers are the best way to prevent a guardianship, because when you have family strife and there's conflict, and the adult children are concerned, and the parents are concerned, and everybody's not quite communicating great, that's where a care manager can come in and really address some of those issues and hopefully hold off on a guardianship. But I wanted to first of all just kind of talk about, guardianship's been in the news both because of I Care a Lot, the movie, but also with Britney Spears, right? So everybody's kind of hearing a lot about guardianships and how somebody who seems so capable could be declared incapacitated. So I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about what the myths are and how that's, not really true, at least in New Jersey. So first of all, you note in the movie there was no due process, right? They just knocked on her door and said, come with me, okay? That cannot happen, okay? There's very strict due process rules all throughout the entire time. There is a court-appointed attorney that the individual is given, so that person is their advocate. So you could never have a situation where nobody is there to advocate and you're just, pulled out of your house. In terms of all the issues with fees, like, oh, you're going to make big money as a guardian. Not so much. So there are very specific rules about how much you can make. If somebody had a lot of money, the person who is their guardian does get a very small percent, and so it is possible that you could make a decent, more than one might think in terms of doing that. But for all the work that you have to do related to that, you're managing their assets, it's just nothing. Most of the time, and I do serve as guardian. I've been guardian for 7 years for an individual who's incapacitated and developmentally disabled. 0. Not a dime. I do it pro bono. Very, very often, if you get assigned a case where you might make a little bit of money, maybe you're going to make, a few $1,000s, and the next case, the judge is going to ask you to serve pro bono. So this is not a money-making endeavor.
I wanted to add two things just to sort of supplement in terms of what Shana is saying, in terms of that due process point. When there's a court-appointed attorney appointed, and even if there's a temporary guardian appointed, very often, more and more in New Jersey, and I think especially in Bergen County, because there's such an awareness of care management, the court-appointed attorney or the temporary guardian or both will ask for a social worker, for a care manager to say, look, we're the court-appointed attorney, but we don't know how to assess somebody's needs. We want somebody else to, that's not our role. We're maybe making a decision, but we do want somebody else to come in and say, well, what's best for this person? So the care manager or social worker would come in as really a neutral party because, and as I always say, regardless of who hires me, and I've been hired by the court-appointed attorney, the temporary guardian, one person on one side, one person on the other side, and sometimes the judge will even just say 12 generations. And regardless of who hires us, the care manager is really ethically bound to advocate for that client and to say this is what that person needs. So along the way of this due process, there are points in place for someone to say, we want to talk to an expert, whether it's a care manager or a doctor or multiple different people, to say, what are the recommendations? So it's not just this appointed guardian that's going to come in and say, I'm going to take you from your home and put you in this place that I think is whatever. So again, and the other point in terms of the finances, and I always reinforce this to families, the level of accountability that the guardians have to have, it's higher than any family member would have. Well,
Yeah.
there's a bond, certainly, but they have to provide an annual report to the court that includes a detailed of every dime that's spent and everything else. And I always explain to facilities that, their level of communication to guardians has to be higher than their level of communication to families. Because family members, there's no legal, they're not bound to say, oh yeah, I know my mom had a med change in September. A guardian has to be aware that their ward had a medication change in September, and this is why, and this is what happened, and that there was somebody monitoring that. So there are so many, I just wanted to touch on those, there are safeguards along the way, and within those safeguards, there's professionals that are appointed to help support that, so.
Yeah. So after one's appointed guardian, as Stacey mentioned, there is an annual report, both a well-being report, where you have to list every time the person went to the doctor, where they are. If someone is being moved from their home, you have to notify the court. If you're going to sell the property, right? She was selling properties out from under the people. That's a separate court filing. The court has to approve it. Has to approve the price. Has to make sure, is this an interested party that it's being sold to? So all of those things are places where the courts are going to be involved and are going to be, checking up. There is a guardianship monitoring program as well, where other volunteers come in and they read the reports and make sure that everything is appropriate. Even with all of this, because of what's happened in the media and all of the concern about guardians, and I will say there have been a couple of isolated cases of guardians taking from their wards. As a result of that, there is now a whole new set of rules. So there are background checks now. If you're going to become a guardian, you have to go through a background check, fingerprinting, a whole criminal check. And they're also doing more interviewing and more monitoring and all of that. So they really have even kind of stepped up the following of it to make sure that everything is, appropriate. I always say that in this movie, it projected guardianship as a tool for financial exploitation. And I guess theoretically that could happen. It's not the way it's there, but in a much more limited way. But 9 times out of 10, it's a tool against financial exploitation that's already happened. Do you have a story about that you want to talk about?
Ton of stories. So I worked a lot of guardianship cases where there are no children, therefore there's a court-appointed guardian because there are no children or family members, or the family doesn't want to be involved in that role. So there is a court-appointed guardian who's very often an attorney, or sometimes just somebody who does this often. And a lot of times on cases where there are multiple children who can't agree on who's, I would say who's the favorite child, but really who's the guardian, that, you know, who should be in charge of making those decisions. And I think, you know, with that, the important thing really, not, I don't want to say in terms of like preventing it, but the conversation piece is so critically important. I know Shana's going to talk about all of the documents to have in place to try to see if maybe guardianship wouldn't be necessary at some point. But I always say one of the most important pieces is having the conversation. Having a power of attorney document or an advance directive and not talking to your family about it, it's sort of like having car insurance and not putting it in your car. You wouldn't do that, right? You drive around, you know that you're aware of your policy. It's not the best analogy, but it is just as important to have those documents as it is to sit down with your family and say, okay, I've created this document, and here, and this is a person, I am, you know, Jane and Sue, you know, your sisters, and I love you both, but Jane is the one that I am appointing as the person to be my power of attorney and my healthcare proxy. Sue, I need you to acknowledge that Jane will be the healthcare proxy, and these are some of my wishes. That conversation, I think, is one of the most important conversations a family should have. We're not geared to be comfortable talking about those things. You know, I think especially in our society, especially between parents and children, and often in different cultures, you don't talk about those things with your kids. You create the document, you put it away, and you say, I've had my own parents who've been hearing me talk about this for over 20 years, who pulled me aside to say, I want to let you know that you're the healthcare proxy, but don't tell your sister. Because she's the older one, so it's her birthright to have, you know, she inherited holiday dinners and the front seat and all the other things, so it would be natural that, you know, she thinks that she'd be. And I said, no, we're going to talk about this. This is not going to be a secret. It's equally important to talk about it as to put it on a piece of paper. So having those conversations can really help bring it, you know, again, not necessarily prevent guardianship, but help sort of make everyone more aware, and it makes it a little bit easier when things get to that point to say, no, remember, Mom was very clear, this is what she wanted.
So one of the things that I see all the time, which I'm sure you have seen too, is the senior who comes into my office and they don't want any of their kids to get upset, so I'm just going to name all of them. They're all going to be co-powers of attorney or co-agents and co-executors. Oh, and yeah, I mean, they haven't really talked in 10 years, but they'll be fine. They'll do what I say. Literally, I can't even tell you how many times, right?
Absolutely.
How's that work out?
It doesn't. It doesn't. I've had so many cases where 3 well-intentioned children, and I've had a lot with 3. It makes me wonder if I should have had 4th, but I have 3 kids.
Me too.
But, you know, where there's 2 or 3 or 4 well-intentioned children, they all love Mom and Dad. There's no question that they would love for them. There's no question that Mom or Dad love them. But they all have slightly different ideas about what Mom or Dad wants. And they have slightly different ideas of who should have ultimately that power. And while it's very often about money, and it's interesting that very often we think about guardianship in terms of money, I've had a lot of cases where money actually doesn't play into it, where it is as if you're watching 8-year-old children fight over the attention of Mom and Dad. That can easily play out as adult children. And what happens is one will bring Mom to one attorney and have a power of attorney drawn up, and then the son is having lunch with Mom the next week and says, Mom, I want you to meet my friend Shana. And Shana doesn't know that last week they were with another attorney. And now all of a sudden we have 2 power of attorney documents that are created within the same amount of time. And, you know, there's a little bit of concern about how confused is Mom, but no one's necessarily talking about capacity. But now you have 2 power of attorney documents and 2 children that seemingly are well-intentioned. And that's often when the court says, okay, well, we settle those things, we're appointing a guardian. And now all of a sudden, none of the children. So I had one case, and it went on about 2 years until they finally settled, where here's 3 children that were fighting over Dad. It was awful. It was last year's, and they're fighting over who has control. Again, not about the money. There was enough money that they weren't actually fighting over the money. They were fighting over control of him. And it got to the point that they couldn't even email back and forth with each other because there was restraining orders about emailing between them. They couldn't be in the same room. I had to be present during every visit. This escalated to the point that their last years with their dad, not only could he not be able to be in the same room with his children, but they couldn't be in the same room with each other, and they couldn't support each other. And this, even at his funeral, it was horrible. So that's where, you know, and look, the dynamics of the family, I'm not sure if having that conversation would have been possible, but, you know, I think had they had that conversation and they didn't all have these conflicting power of attorneys, maybe there wouldn't need to be another court appointed guardian.
Something similar when my husband passed away. My daughter didn't want to repass, my son did.
Right.
And I had to speak to the both of them.
Right,
You know, and then
But ultimately, then you were that deciding factor. Not easy when we have people that
they had their
disagree.
friends too that they felt out, you know, and spoke to both of them, but it wasn't easy. It's, you know, and I said, you have to do it. He was a part-time policeman, he was a fireman. They had to get that repass in there. And she didn't want it, no matter what, but we had to sit there and.
I think sometimes talking about some of the, what our visions are, right.
I think
But it's,
having that conversation ahead of time really can make a big difference. You talked about she's 3 kids and then, it's better. I had a case where it was guardianship of a sibling, 14 siblings.
Oh my gosh.
So what happens? They're in teams, right? Oh, I'm gonna get this, I'm calling this one, okay, these 4 think this person should do it, these 4 think this. I mean, it was horrible. And this poor young woman, developmentally disabled, is being, torn back and forth, and is she gonna live with this one or live, can you imagine that scenario? All because mom and dad didn't step up and say, this is what's gonna happen, this is the trust, and this person's gonna be the trustee, and this person's gonna be where she resides, and this, da-da-da-da. You gotta do it.
On the flip side, and I do have a case that I'm actually working on now, and we're hoping to kind of be able to mediate, but there are, and again, it's another one where there's nephews and brothers and whatever, and everybody's caring and different opinions on what should happen. And I think it may end up becoming a court-appointed guardian so that the family can just go back to being the family. That the nephew can be the nephew, that the brother can be the brother, that they can focus, and they're going to still be involved in the conversations and some of the decisions, and the guardian will look to the family and say, what do you think this person would want? But ultimately, the decisions will be the court-appointed guardians. And while that can seem like, oh, that's not family, it's allowing the family to be the family and to be with him and have not every conversation with, with the client, with the individual, be surrounding this game of tug of war. So I think sometimes appointing a guardian can actually help resolve some of those
I
things.
have a question. We have a friend. No, we're not. He has no family except for his sister who he doesn't speak to. He has a home. What should he do in that case?
Yeah, so I was actually gonna talk about that. So in terms of,
Have to have something in place.
yeah, so the people who are most likely to have, to be the subject of guardians are people like that, right? So there's certainly many cases where there's family issues, but the largest group for guardians is people like your friend who doesn't have immediate family. We call those solo seniors. Those people, it is particularly important to do the advance planning, to think about ahead of time who they want as their various agents and to do the documents that would appoint them. Because if they don't, then they're going to move from solo senior into something that we call in the industry an elder orphan or the unbefriended. Okay, so
we're wondering where would the house go with that?
right. So in that situation, if you are unbefriended, it means that you don't have any documents in place. And at that point then, if you become incapacitated, then there's no one there to make that decision. Then you've got to have a guardian appointed because you haven't taken the proactive step of saying, I want my best friend, or I want my clergy member, or I want my accountant who's done my taxes for 50 years, So if you And it can be any of those people. It doesn't have to be a family member. It can be anybody who you're comfortable with. And if you don't have those relationships, so Stacey and I are working on a case now where there is a family member, but she lives in Massachusetts and she has her own life and wants to be involved, but can't do those day-to-day things. So they hired Stacey's firm, and then Stacey reached out to me about serving as power of attorney for this woman. So
I'm able.
Sure.
The person she's talking about, we know, he doesn't have anybody. And he said, you have to make plans. And he said, when I'm dead, I don't care.
But it's not about when he's dead. That's the thing. So here's the thing. I want you to take this and show it to him. Because what this talks about is what happens to you if you don't have someone. You're going to be in the hospital, okay? First of all, you're not going to get the care you need at home. You're likely to get medical neglect. Then if you then go into the hospital, you're going to stay there way past when you're ready to go home. Why? There's nobody, there's no discharge plan.
I'm trying to talk
Yeah.
with what he needs to do.
So,
And he said, when I'm dead, I don't care.
right, but that's the thing, is it's not about when you're dead. It's about the neighbor who's going to come over and take advantage because he doesn't have somebody to protect him from that.
But what would happen with the home then if he has a sister, but he doesn't speak to her? So we were wondering, what happens to the home if something happens to him?
You know, again, if he doesn't have any documents, there is a formal, there's a legacy, it's called intestate succession, so his home would go probably to his sister, okay?
And he doesn't
That's
want
the-
to go to his sister.
That's got to do something
Right,
about it.
so that's a problem, but the much bigger problem is what's gonna happen when he's alive, okay? I'm gonna tell you a little story, very sad, but just, I had a friend, best friend of someone call me, and her friend had died in her home without anyone knowing, okay? Nobody there to, to find her. She wanted to bury her friend, she couldn't get her friend buried. Why? She had no authority to do it.
Oh, geez.
So if you don't do these documents, if you don't plan and you don't have anybody who, is going to be appointed automatically by, operation of law, you really, just the dignity, there's so many dignity issues that you could face, that you could be subject to without other people. And you might as well open your doors for people to take advantage of it then.
Or to facilities, and, I'm, like one of the cases that I'm working on, a woman who, again, had family, but she was somewhat estranged from them. She ended up in a hospital. The hospital didn't know, she was not able to pay them, she was not able to access any of her bills, from the hospital and pay the hospital. She couldn't even give them all the information about herself because of her mental status. Ended up sitting in this hospital for 2 years. Got worse, had a fall, fractured her hip, became more immobilized, and not blaming the hospital. She, they didn't know what to do with her. There was no safe discharge plan, there was no family for them to contact, there was nobody advocating for her. Finally, the hospital initiated guardianship. Their motivation, and again, not faulting them, their motivation was we need to get paid at some point. We've been here for 2 years. Once they initiated guardianship, the guardian found family, even though they don't want to be involved. They found out her home, they found that she did have some assets. They appointed me as care manager to do an assessment and to help get her out of there. I was able to get her out of there and into a more appropriate placement at a lower level of care. She is thriving now. Again, dementia's not reversible. It's not like there's things that were not reversible, but because she didn't have anything in place beforehand, when things started to go bad, when she started, because she was isolated from everybody, when she had a decline, when she had to be removed from her home and sent to the hospital, there was nobody to say, I need to speak with the social worker and start discharge planning. We need to set up care at home, or we need to talk about is assisted living an option, or is memory care an option? And she sat in this hospital for 2 years. So the guardianship for her ended up being a benefit, a positive, and it really helped her. And the care management piece has helped and got her into a more appropriate placement. And I visit her regularly and make sure that there's somebody yelling when someone needs to yell, and somebody being nice to the staff and bringing them donuts and things like that. But had she had an advocate in place for herself before, had she had some clear plans and had somebody in contact to be her point person, she may not have lost those 2 years. So I think, yes, I understand you have concerns and your friend has concerns about what happens when he passes, and those are all valid concerns. We have to focus on our life and how we live better and making sure that we're having conversations and having dialogue with our family and communicating with them about what is important when we're alive. Usually our family conversations end up being, after I'm gone, ... right? Make sure after I'm gone, blah, blah, blah. We don't talk about, and we need to talk more about, if I get sick, this is what's important to me. If I lose my memory, this is what's important to me. I joke, but it's also very serious because my kids have grown up with me working in this industry. It is an almost unusually comfortable conversation at my dining room table, that they'll say, yes, Mom, we know. When you're in memory care, you want to go to music programs and you don't want to have pants with words across your bottom. And, these are, they know, and you don't want us to fight because it's been so much a part of the dialogue. I know that's not the norm. That's what my kids have grown up with because of my line of work. But my goal would be for that to be a little bit more of the norm with everybody so that you're more comfortable talking about what's important to you. And if you don't, if there's someone who doesn't have family, neighbors, friends, or somebody, or say you need to work with a social worker, you need to have an attorney, you need to have somebody who is your advocate, your point person, someone who, when you go to the hospital, there's a note in the fridge to say, this is who is responsible. That's really key. It's good to have friends, but you need someone who's able to facilitate some change. Someone who can call the hospital and say, yes, I have a HIPAA form, you're allowed to speak to me, let's get them out and let's take care of them.
Yes, I, from my mother's experience, she taught us all to get things in order.
Yeah.
My kids all have what has to be done. I have 3. My sisters all have a copy of what has to be done. The only thing is that I don't have it signed by a lawyer, but each of my kids have how I want things, who I want to get things, how I want to be dressed, how long I want the program for the church to be. I have it all laid out because that's how my mother was.
Right.
So my kids all know. My
Let
kids.
me ask you something, so you have that in terms of outreach accounts, which is great and that's important.
Oh, I have written down if something happens and I'm alive too.
Okay, good.
Where
I
I
was gonna
want,
say that's.
where I would like to go. I even named the place where I want to go. If
Oh,
I
so you're
can.
like, you have the conversations that I.
Yes,
do.
in Wayne.
Excellent.
So I have all of that. I showed them all where it is.
Good.
So my kids know, all 3 of them, and my sisters have a copy of everything. I don't have their copies. But I don't want my kids to have to worry when I die. Where's mommy's papers? Where's this? Where's that? They know where everything is neatly typed. I was a secretary. Typed everything. So.
If I had those little candy bars for extra credit, I would absolutely be throwing
Well,
them
my
to you
friends,
right
they
now.
say, how could you talk about that to them? I said, because you have to, even that they don't want to listen, you have to talk to them, or like you say, a close friend, because somebody needs to know what to do or who to call.
And when you have that conversation, has anyone ever taken a CPR class?
Yeah.
When you take a CPR class, what's the first thing you learn? Before you start learning about compression,
So that they don't have to do not resuscitate.
no, that you say to somebody, you call 911.
Oh.
And that is so important in the whole process of doing CPR. The first thing you want to, like, if you're out at a pool, you're whatever, you're at a program, the first thing they teach you when you learn CPR is to clearly communicate. You make eye contact with the person, you point to them, and you say, you call 911. Because in this whole process, when you're in crisis, that message can often get lost. If you're just sitting there starting compressions and you say, someone call 911, I'll assume that Shana's doing it, Shana's going to assume that Kathy's doing that, Kathy's going to assume that Laura's doing it, and no one's calling 911. So that piece, and that's always stuck with me, it's one of the things that stuck with me from high school, that communication piece, that messaging, that clear, make eye contact, make it clear, you don't know the person's name, that is you, right? So you are my healthcare proxy. Everyone is understanding that, that she is my healthcare proxy. That messaging, and I think saying that out loud and having the conversation in person and having it a visual and having everyone together is really important because there's something that gets stuck in our mind more when it's not just this quick conversation on the phone or quick conversation in passing or whisper doorway when someone's leaving, or a note slipped up, saying, here's a copy of my healthcare proxy, but physically actually saying, having the conversation.
But if they're all there and they say you, but if nobody is there, you're gonna call 911.
Well, I use it as an example of the importance of the communication.
But that's part of the plan too, right? So if you live alone, okay, and you are, and you're planning with a professional about, okay, what do I need to do in the event that I am incapacitated? You need to think about, well, who's gonna know, first of all? I just, I fall, who's gonna know? Well, do I have, my Apple Watch? Do I have my fallen and I can't get up? What do I have to make sure that somebody knows? Is the person gonna know what my meds are? Who's gonna take care of my cat? Who's gonna have keys to my house, right? So these are all things that, I don't have to worry about because I have someone who lives with me. But if you don't, you do have to get more detail in your planning, right? So that's part of being proactive, is thinking of all the scenarios that could happen and then how they can be addressed moving forward. So you don't be that story that people tell you, right?
So I just want to break in here. So as someone, I lost my mom pretty young. So she was in her 50s. We had nothing in place. We didn't have her will. We didn't have any of these conversations. And I can tell you right now, it is way more stressful not knowing and when she's incapacitated than it is to have that conversation with your kids. So as somebody, it's actually her birthday today, so happy birthday, Mom. And she'd probably be thrilled that I'm sitting here telling you this. But I can't stress enough, it's an awkward conversation to have with your kids. But if we had had that conversation with my mom before she got cancer, it would have been way easier for us to make the decisions, because I will tell you, we did a lot of reaction decisions and not proactive. And I think it would have been a lot less stressful on all three of us. And we were so lucky that the three of us were on the same page and we all divided up tasks, but that is not how most families work. And if my mom had given us exact details and tasks, it would have been a lot easier, because the three of us would just spend hours talking, all right, who's doing what? And we took on that decision without incorporating her, because she was in surgery or she was incapacitated. So I just want to stress how important that is, just from a personal perspective. It's way easier to have those conversations. I really wish we had.
And I think there are professionals along the way, and Shana has gotten crisis calls, and I've gotten crisis calls, and you can get a professional involved at any point. Attorneys go to emergency rooms and sort of do crisis intervention and paperwork and things like that. But it's always better if you can get professionals involved sooner. So from a care manager perspective, certainly, we respond when it's a crisis, when it's a discharge planning issue, and someone needs to get help getting out of the hospital. But I'd also love more of the, I'm fine, but I live alone, and I'd like to make sure that I have someone who's in place to sort of know my medications, to know where my important documents are, to know where the spare keys are. And I can tell you, we have plenty of clients that we also know what their pet's, the vet is, what their pet's schedule is, because your pets are important, right? And so to someone to take care of those things as well.
Yeah, I guess when we first started here, it has to be about 3 years ago, here at Fairlawn, they had this woman come in. It was like a 4-week program. The first week we got a loose leaf binder, and even though my husband and I were together, I said, oh, we only need one. She said, no, you need 2. And it's got dividers and everything, and we went week by week. So it has right down to your banking, insurances. But the most important thing is your wish for aging. Do you want to age at home? Do you want to be in an assisted living facility or versus a nursing home? But I mean, this book has everything. We both have a binder. And with our kids, we said, if anything happens to either of us, you have our binder here. It tells you exactly what we want. It tells you where our insurance is, what our pensions are, and it's all in one place. We both have binders, and it was really very good. But I just have one question. So for example, I have 2 children, and because I'm from New York, I have a healthcare proxy. So I'm allowed, one is my healthcare proxy and the other is an alternative if that person's not available. And what happens though if something happens and they have to make a decision, and even though, let's say my son was my healthcare proxy, if my daughter doesn't agree with what he wants to do they still go by my wishes? Because my wishes are written, and he is my healthcare proxy, or does it not work when the other one disagrees?
I'll let Shana start and then I'll let Shana start.
So, your son, as your healthcare agent, has the authority to make the decision, okay? So whatever he says is the decision that is going to be followed. However, if your daughter saw he's doing something completely contrary to what her documents say, it says that she wants to be taken off of life support and he says, no, I'm not gonna do that. She could file a guardianship action and say he is not following because he, as the healthcare agent, is bound to follow your wishes. So therefore, that, and I've had that case where the other child brought in action saying they're doing something that's completely contrary. Okay, so that's kind of how it works.
I think sort of the other component of that is, and this is sort of where that conversation piece comes into it so often, because sometimes, we can never predict every single scenario that may happen. You can't, and most of us create advanced directives when we're healthy. So it's important, number one, to continue to look at them, review them, involve your doctor in some of the conversations, understand some of the things that may happen based on a new diagnosis or prognosis that you have, because there may be new conversations that are going to come up. For example, I've had somebody who, in an original advanced directive was very clear that they would not want a feeding tube. But then there was a medical condition along the way that came up that a feeding tube for a temporary point while something was healing could have been beneficial. So their original advanced directive, it was hard that it didn't predict this scenario. So it's not called to meet the advanced directive documents, but the importance of understanding not just the document, but again, having those conversations and understanding the different points and involving the doctor and updating them. And also knowing and looking at the advanced directive that you do. Some of them I've seen have wording like, if my quality of life is impaired. That may be okay to say, but then you need to make sure that someone understands what is quality of life to you, and what does that mean to you? What is important? I had a scenario where a daughter said, Mom has no quality of life. She doesn't know who I am anymore. She doesn't know who she is. She thinks it's 1942 and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Mom gets up every day. She goes to every activity. She's walking around. She's happy. She dances. She's this. She thinks that she is on a cruise for life. She's pretty content. So yes, is she confused? But for her in her moment, from what I'm looking at, she has a beautiful quality of life. I'm not saying I'm right and the daughter was wrong, but having that understanding of, well, what do you mean by quality of life? Again, it's just as important as having the documents that are going to appoint somebody. And also appointing someone that can carry them through. Don't just appoint your child because they're the firstborn. I've had people who don't appoint their children because as much as they love their children and they know that their children won't be able to make those decisions when the time comes or be able to follow what their wishes are. So appoint a neighbor if you need to, appoint a niece or nephew. Think clearly about who you're appointing. It's not a birthright. It's not something that has to go with your family member that's the closest. It's somebody who you know will respond and will answer the phone when the phone rings, and somebody who will be able to carry out your wishes.
So I want to just add two things to that. One is the story that you told about the feeding tube. I had that same situation, and we actually solved it through a guardianship. So the family members filed a guardianship, a special medical guardian, so it's an emergent thing. So the amazing story was like over Easter weekend. Wow. This person was, if they didn't put the feeding tube in, they were losing weight, and the fact was, if she just got the feeding tube, she was gonna recover. And that wasn't what she was envisioning. She was actually a nurse. It was clear that it was not at all what she meant, but it was the way it was being interpreted. And so we were able to ultimately get the feeding tube inserted, and she survived. So, crazy story. But then, there's something else that you said. I don't know. Anyway, whatever the other point was gone. Kathy, I want to open up just to have you. I know that you've had these conversations a lot. Is there anything you want to add?
And we've done presentations on having the conversation of your life and the types of documents that you can use. What are the key things, and we have actually, we're just scheduled today with Karen to have a presentation on the 5 wishes documents, to do actually a workshop to help you go through a document like that and put all your wishes into it. So at the end of May,
I know.
but
5 Wishes is more detailed and really talks about how you envision your, what's important to you, who you want in the room with you in the play, music you want playing. It's really more of a great tool for having some of those conversations about what your values are, what's important to you, how you want your life to be. And when I use the term end of life, I don't mean last hours and days. End of life can be months and years. It's, I think that's
especially with Alzheimer's.
yes.
And that was actually the thing that I was going to say was, there's differences between living will documents and instruction directive documents. I mean, the ones that we use for our older plans, it has a whole section in dementia. So you would never not know what quality of life meant because it addresses that, if I had dementia, would I want this, so it really makes a big difference to, delve a little bit deeper in those conversations or in the instructions that you need.
The doctor keeps saying, get your living will done, get your living.
No, that's what,
And then we're just,
that's the option. The 5 wishes is one of the options to do that, and that's the one that we have to present. But I want you to say, sometimes we wonder, how do you start that conversation with your family? And I think that's one of the most difficult things. If you know somebody in the hospital, or if someone has just passed away, those are prime times to talk about their situation and it's an easy opening with your kids or whoever, your neighbors, your friends, to talk about you. I wouldn't want that situation, or I wouldn't want, you don't know how to start. How do you start that? They talk about a holiday, around the holiday table, you're gonna sit there and talk about, because for many of us, that's the only time we get to see our family. Well, but over the phone, so my friend just died, and this is what they did at her funeral. Don't, please, I don't want that. And she ended up dying because certain things were not done. And if she only had a file of life on her refrigerator with all of the information about her medical history and about her medications, when the EMTs got there, they could have taken care of her and she wouldn't have died. Okay? So it's very hard to think about when we're well and we're functioning, and those of you all here are functioning well. How do we think about things are not going to be so good, and what do we do about it? But we need to prepare. So, file of life is one thing, and we're looking to have a section here also. So, North Jersey Villages is looking to help seniors choose to make it home. Some of them alone, some of them as couples, and to have no one around, so your family is distant. Very important that you set up kind of information with neighbors, connecting with your neighbors to support each other. So some of the programs that we have besides the File of Life, the COIL that we promote, the Conversation of Your Life, the 5 Wishes. We also are trying to structure something called Pitfalls. So many of us go to the doctors and live alone, go to the doctor and he's spouting, or she is spouting all these things to you. It's very hard for you to absorb it all. Wouldn't it be good to have somebody you trust, whether it be a healthcare proxy or someone other than a friend, to sit there and take notes for you? Okay? So that can then be related either to a distant family or just to refresh your own mind and to say, oh, that's what that meant, that's what that meant. To have the right questions in place, because you have somebody else who heard it, another set of ears heard it. And the other thing is discharge plan. Very much part of the villages is not a place, it's a concept of getting groups of neighbors to support each other. So you can have a village that's 25 people in an airline or 250 people in an airline area. So you want to connect with people and find the right connections with people who can support each other and live for each other. I think you, or actually the senior centers, already have those connections. But think about all of those who are those solo seniors who are at home alone. You don't have people nearby like your friends, right? And how would the village concept help them? So we're here to provide that support and the isolated and the solo seniors, the ones who don't come out to the senior center program, are the ones we're trying to reach. One of the things this will be my last point right now, is that we're recording this presentation today. So if any of you are uncomfortable with being recorded, because we will be on, you can sit your head, whatever. If you're uncomfortable with that, you can just let us know, and we'll make sure none of the footage that you're is added. But the reason I can do that is because we then will have these videos go on to the local TV stations, like the Fairway TV. So the seniors who are at home, all their family members will be able to have the same information that you have come out. Yeah. Okay, so that's one of our, so those are some of the things that North Jersey Villages and the village concept is all about.
So we've talked a lot about the medical piece. I just want to, close, and then certainly we'll have any other questions, on some of the financial preparation that you can do. So if you are a solo senior and you're concerned about the possibility of someone financially exploiting you, well, certainly having a financial power of attorney is one way that you can make sure. But there are a number of other things. So you could have joint powers of attorney. You could have somebody who's going to do the day-to-day banking for you, and maybe that's a professional. There are money managers and care managers who will do that. They'll come once a month or as needed, and meet with you and do your bills with you. But then you might have someone else who is not able to be that level of involved, but it's just getting a second set of statements, just as a second check. I had a case where there was a financial advisor, was power of attorney for his client. Okay, he had known her for many years, had become her power of attorney. There was family who cared very much about her, but they were excited that there was somebody who they thought they could trust, who was the power of attorney. Never looked, never got a second set of statements. He took millions of dollars from her, literally millions. They found out 2 weeks before she died. They were actually able to recover some of it. And interestingly, a guardianship is what brought it in. It was reported to a bank, and a guardianship ensued. So not always a bad thing. But anyway, power of attorney, maybe you're not so sure you're comfortable. There are a lot of limitations that we can put in the power of attorney to make sure that the person has only the powers that you want them to have, not all powers over all of your assets. Maybe you set up a small bank account that just gets your Social Security, and that's enough to pay your regular bills. Their power of attorney on that account, but not on your investment accounts, right? So there's a number of ways that you can structure your holdings. You might have a revocable trust. That might be another way to kind of protect. So there's a lot of things that you can do to make sure that you're kind of limiting the access to the person who you've designated as your power of attorney. Similarly, your home. Think about it. If you have people coming into your house, that you have caregivers, or you have somebody who's doing some cleaning, or even just volunteers who are coming in. Are there identifying documents? Are there bank statements around? Are there things that they could get a hold of and then use that to do something nefarious? So important to kind of think about these things. If you've got caregivers come in, do a background check if you're not going through an agency. So if you're going through an agency, they're going to be bonded, and they're going to, they will have done a background check. But if you're hiring someone privately, do that. See if you can, try and make sure that this isn't somebody who is a predator who goes from person to person. And then, you know, we certainly talk about making sure that everybody has the same information and everybody who is, you know, involved knows where your assets are, who has your power of attorney, and you know, and can step in and kind of get that information, get the information that they might need if something seems like it's not going quite right. Okay?
And I guess, you know, the biggest takeaway from, you know, is just know that no one has to go through this alone. And you know, I like to hear Laura's story, and it's tragic, but it's sort of a message of this. It doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to go through this process alone. There are so many professionals that can help and that can guide and that can help you create documents and that can help advise in terms of different resources and plan of care and be a point person at a medical appointment, you know, help you kind of build your village. So, you know, there's so many different resources for seniors and for all of us out there. It's so important to be able to reach out. And I can guarantee if you reach out to any one of us and we're not the person and we think that the other one can be, the nice thing, we all play very nicely in the sandbox together. I like to say that. But it's a great thing about, and I think maybe it's a North Jersey thing, Eddie and I have known each other for years too. You know, we work well together. We love, even if we can't directly help someone, we love to say, I want you to call my psychiatrist. I'm gonna refer you to Shana. So that's a great resource. But just reach out and say, I don't know what to do in this situation. That's
You know, that's one of the things where doing documents ahead of time can assist. It's also where I've seen a lot of guardianships. I've seen guardianships where all of a sudden, you know, the caregiver or the friend, the case that I was talking about where the financial advisor took millions, the other person who was taking money from her was the waiter at the restaurant. She went every day to the same restaurant, and she had a crush on this waiter. And he took advantage, and she gave him a bunch of money as well. So, you know, you see these situations where people endear themselves to, you know, people who are vulnerable. And so it really falls on us to protect ourselves ahead of time. And also, if we see something happening that looks not quite right, there's somebody involved who, you know, seems a little too friendly, to, you know, kind of investigate a little and see if there's some way that you can help, you know, your friend or your family member.
How expensive is guardianship and how does it work? Because like if you're incapacitated and you're in the hospital, how does that work?
You know, that's a great question, and it's really one of the reasons that I encourage people to avoid guardianship if they can by doing documents ahead of time, because it's not inexpensive. So a guardianship action could range anywhere from, I'd say in a very, very simple case, like for instance, a parent of a child with a developmental disability, right? They have to become their guardian when that child ages 18. A case like that might be $2,500. The case with the 14 siblings settled, they had spent $100,000. This girl didn't have any money. Now, normally the cost of a guardianship, because normally they're in the range of, you know, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, right? If they're not contested and not, you know, too involved. $4,000, $5,000, let's say. That amount of money can ultimately all come from the person who has, the guardianship was brought, you know, to protect them, right? So that is something that you would see in the film that was, you know, the teeniest bit true, is that all of the legal fees are paid ultimately by that person's estate if they have them. But the reason that I've been pro bono for 7 years taking care of my good friend is because he has to pay. So all of the attorneys who were involved, the person who brought the action, and which was actually me, the person who brought the action, and then I was ultimately appointed as well, was because all, you know, there was no fees paid anywhere along the way, so there was no source of payment.
I have a question. Does the guardian have to be bonded?
Yes, unless it's waived.
And what if it's if the court said the guardian had to be bonded? Now, can that be appealed? It's the wife that's the guardian.
So the court is going to set bond, even when it's the wife, almost every single time, okay? You can, that's something that's discussed in court, and the judge will ask the court-appointed attorney their opinion on, you know, in the best interest of this person, should the bond be put in and or waived. And that person might say, well, you know, it's the wife and there's only $50,000 left and so we're not going to bond, you know, then I'll waive it, okay? But most of the time, even in marriage cases, I've had where they bond for half of the value. Because, you know, ultimately the court's job is to protect the incapacitated
This has been
person.
going on for about 3 years now.
Yeah. And that's where, you know,
might even get it, still get it waived.
Yeah.
But you'd have to go to court.
You'd have to go back to the judge, yes. Yeah, you'd have to go back to the judge.
Do they
I
ever-
have had situations where a person can't get bonded, a family member, you know, has bad credit history or whatever, so they can't get bonded, and that's where now, like they're doing bankruptcy checks on people who are going to be appointed because they want to make sure, is this someone who's not doing it for money, right? So if you have somebody who can't be bonded, then they might have to have somebody else appointed with them, or the court in some limited situation. I mean, they really don't unless there's no money, because
There's money,
again,
that's-
the court's ultimate role is to protect the person, and even though this is the spouse, she could run away with the money, or she could mismanage it, right? She gives it to somebody who
I'm
invested.
stuck with doing it with county.
Yeah, no, I know. So when we talk about bonding, it's like an insurance policy. So that if the guardian does something wrong, there's some recovery, right? So if I'm a court-appointed guardian and I run off with my ward's money, then you can go to the bond company to recover the funds. And then the bond company will come find me.
And it's just another example, there's a very high level of accountability every step along the way of guardianship, from the initial filings and whether or not someone's declared incapacitated, to, you know, who is gonna be the guardian, and even monitoring that person, ongoing guardian. I have cases, the guardian was appointed 15 years ago, and still, every year, they're submitting a report of every penny that was spent and all the care and everything else. So there's a very high level of accountability to prevent the nightmares of the movie.
I have one quick question. This was in my family tree. There was 3 brothers. The oldest brother had power of attorney. The parents all dead, and he used a lot of money of his father's money for his pleasure, vacation, everything. So now the parents are both dead, and there's the 3 brothers left, but they still have a house. Okay? So now, can they sue them, the brother who had power of attorney, because he used a lot of his father's money?
Happens all the time.
And now they could, if they sell the house, they're still gonna split equally the 3 of them. And the 2 brothers don't wanna give him anything because they already took a lot of money.
Yeah, we do those type of cases as well. Yep.
Very interesting, thank you. These are my nephews.
I thought it was supposed to be easy when you
You
get
guys have a lot of great questions.
It's not easy.
I need questions.
I'll tell you, I do this right now.
Got a couple of
So I need
I don't need a stupid
Well, we're
question.
here. No stupid question.
But let's say I made him my healthcare proxy and we're now currently married. But we end up 5 years from now having a nasty divorce, but I never changed that paper.
Automatically terminated.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
Sorry,
Yep.
honey.
You're out.
When you get divorced, that's automatically terminated?
Yes, yes, your fiduciary appointments, and if you still want that person, even with healthcare proxy, if you still want that person, because sometimes that person's still a part of your life, even if you're, divorced, and it might be the only person, you actually have to affirmatively redo your document, because they will assume that it's terminated. So, yeah, and I've had that. It's not just them. It's anyone, not your kids, but let's say it was a second marriage. their kids are going to, because that case too, their kids are automatically terminated as the fiduciary. So you want, and as beneficiaries. So if you still want those people involved, you need to redo your documents to do that. It gets very complicated. I've had so many cases where, you know, it's not clear who's going to inherit or whatever because of cases like that. Somebody
It's
passes
good to,
away.
it's another reason, it's good to review them. I don't know if you have a set recommendation of how many years, but I know that, you know, so many people are like dusting it off and realizing, you know, the alternate person is no longer alive, they no longer have contact, if it's aren't our wishes, or, you know, they never added a third child on there, that's all, you know, so, I think it's good to review them periodically. Make sure your wishes.
So say, I've been married 3 times. My third husband, he's fine. So his children, he had 3 children, they would not be entitled to anything of mine, right? Because it's been over 10 years.
Right. Unless you included them specifically in your document.
No.
What would you say?
We just had a, you know, many of us are information on the computer now. So that information being on the computer only and not having access. My husband just had this realization, the 2 of us flying together, we both travel with our computers, and we're the ones that have the documents that we're gone, and the computers are gone. All of our information is gone.
Yeah, no, that's a very, I have a very sad story right now. I have a woman who, her husband was a CPA, and all of the financial documents, all the tax returns, all of the financial documents from their personal, but also for all of his clients, are only on his computer. No password. He didn't tell anyone what the password was before he died.
See, my kids have
She
all
can't
my
get into
passwords.
it.
My kids have my password, each one.
That is crazy. Yeah.
So you gotta think about those
They can
things.
get
People
into it.
have to get the password.
You can get into it somehow, but
It's hard.
Yeah, you wanna make sure that you have sort of this, I love the idea of the binder, and then making sure you're periodically reviewing it with somebody to make sure they know where it is and what's in there.
What's your
That's
password?
the way it says, some things so you don't have to worry.
There you go, right.
When I had mine on my phone, so in case something happens on my phone, I just looked it up, but I should have it written down, but I got so tired of writing it down and putting it on my phone. I knew all my passwords on my phone. Joanne from the fabric store, she goes, just put Joanne, because she opened up coupons, and she goes, that's one good thing, one way to remember. You can't do that with everybody. People get that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I got my order.